Freezing food can be one of the best and safest ways to preserve a lot of different kinds of foods, but making sure that we freeze our food the best way that we can help ensure that the quality of the food and the safety of the food stays as high as possible. Hey my friends, welcome back to Pantry Preparedness. Today we're going to talk about freezing food. Freezing is one of the best ways to preserve food, in large part because when food is frozen, from a safety standpoint, it can basically last indefinitely. Now, we all know that from a practical standpoint, that's usually not how it turns out, but there are some reasons for that. And so I want to walk through some of the best ways to ensure that our frozen food stays as high quality as possible. From a health safety standpoint, freezing your food is one of the best ways to keep it safe, in large part because basically while it's frozen, unhealthy bacteria, like unsafe bacteria, just can't grow in your food. And so the food won't spoil in that way. However, the downside of freezing our food is that over time, it does seem to get bad from a quality standpoint. And that's because of what we call freezer burn. Essentially, in a cold space like a freezer, the air is not able to hold as much moisture. And as a result, the air inside of your freezer tends to be really, really dry. And so that air will suck all the moisture out of whatever's frozen if that isn't totally sealed in. So the first step whenever I want to freeze food is to, as much as possible, have it in a sealed package of some kind. So for example, let me show you what I just did last night. I had a pork loin. My wife bought 2 big pork loins. They were on sale and they just looked really good. And she cut one of them, she sliced it into pork chops. She put some of them in the crock pot and we had them for dinner, but we still had like 12 pork chops left. On top of that, we had a second pork loin. So I took the second pork loin and I cut it in half so we could have 2 roasts, or we could cut one of them up in the future for chops or whatever, but you can also make a roast out of it. So I took those pork chops and I put them into these vacuum sealed bags, as you can see here. Now, if you'll notice, I did place more than one per bag, so there's just no need to package them completely individually, not for us, but also just to save on the packaging. I don't need to use up a ton of this vacuum sealing material because I can put multiple in one package. But you'll notice that I laid them all flat. There's only one layer thick of pork chops. So I laid them side by side. I didn't stack them. Then you can see that I vacuum seal them. I get a ton of the air out of them. I try not to suck out much of the moisture. I just get as much air out as I can, and then I seal them off really good. Whenever I vacuum seal, I almost always put 2 seals on it because I've had that first seal fail plenty of times where after it's been in the freezer for a little bit, I noticed that it's not vacuum sealed anymore. And if that's the case, then we're not getting a lot of benefit out of this. Now, sometimes when we freeze foods, we'll use Ziploc bags. I've just noticed that over time, Ziploc bags, they don't like totally perfectly seal because I know over time I do get air in them. They just aren't quite as good. So vacuum sealing is my preference, but we did this with freezer bags for a long time and it works really well too. The next thing that I do is I take whatever I'm freezing, in this case these pork chops, and I like to lay them out on a baking sheet, 1 layer thick. And then I take them out and I put them in my freezer in the garage. I have a perfect spot for that here in this freezer. This is mostly our dairy freezer. We have 3 stand-up freezers in our garage. And this one is mostly all dairy products. And that top shelf is just full of milk. And so I just set it on top of the milk. There's plenty of headspace above that. It's where the cold air first comes into the freezer. And so it's gonna freeze quickly, but also there's just nothing right around it. Once again, because I laid these only 1 layer thick, both in the vacuum sealed packaging, but also now on this tray, they're able to freeze as quickly as possible. The faster that your food freezes, the less of an issue you're gonna have from a food safety standpoint. We need to get it as cold as possible, as quickly as possible. From the refrigerator into the vacuum sealed packaging into the freezer. And the quicker that we freeze it, the safer it's gonna be, but also the better the quality is gonna be. I do the same thing oftentimes with other stuff that I freeze. If I chop up carrots and I wanna freeze it, I don't vacuum seal it first. I actually just lay out the carrots on a tray and I freeze them in the freezer as quickly as possible. And then once they're frozen solid, that's when I bring them back in, put them in a bag, or maybe even vacuum seal them, and then put them back in the freezer. With those larger roasts, I vacuum sealed them as well, but they're a bigger, thicker roast. They're gonna take longer to freeze. I don't worry about putting them necessarily on a big tray, but I did take them out to the freezer and I put them in separate spots where each of them was completely surrounded by other things that were already frozen, and so they'd be able to freeze as quickly as possible. I'm not gonna set them right next to each other or stack them on top of each other because they're gonna have more of their current heat that's inside of them. Heat, because it's warmer inside of those pork roasts than it is in the freezer. And it's gonna take longer for that heat to dissipate throughout the freezer into the cold. I let them freeze overnight. And then in the morning, they were completely frozen solid this morning. And I just took them all out. I stacked them all up and I put them in the freezer where I actually wanted to store them, stacked neatly together and well organized. The third key and important thing to keeping your frozen food good as long as possible is to not let food thaw and refreeze multiple times. If that happens, the quality of the food is going to go down every single time. For example, we do a lot of frozen vegetables, either ones we grow in the garden or ones we buy from the store. What we'll do is we'll take out a package of those vegetables and we'll often end up using up about half a package and then we have the rest. The best way to do that is to cut it open, use up that half a package and get the rest back in the freezer as quickly as possible, also sealing off the bag that they're in as well as possible. You could put them inside of like another Ziploc bag or something, or you could just tie them off. We just use like a twist tie or something. But I twist it up and I get it pretty tight. I don't leave a lot of air space in the top of an opened bag. I'll twist it pretty tight so there's very little air, and then I'll put the twist tie back on and put it back in the freezer. Again, by leaving as little air in there as possible, we're gonna help minimize that freezer burn. So those are your 3 rules of freezing food. The first one, try to seal it off from the outside environment, and typically with as little extra air inside of the packaging as possible. The second rule, freeze it fast. The quicker that you can get it frozen all the way through, the higher quality your food's gonna stay, the flavor's gonna stay better, the freezer burn's gonna be minimized, and of course, it's gonna be safer. And that third rule is, as much as possible, do not let your food thaw and refreeze over and over and over again, and your food's gonna last for a really long time. As you can see, we freeze a lot of food. That's why we have 3 freezers. And I can tell you that you can probably freeze a lot more foods than you might think that you can, as long as you follow those principles. I hope that was helpful for you. If you like preparedness stuff, food storage, as well as anything else preparedness, I think you're gonna like this channel. That's what we do here at Pantry Preparedness. I hope to see you in the next video.